Chinese private media company Taiwan Media reports that when he was arrested, he was found to have over 100 mistresses and 3 metric tons of cash. That's right, this guy was found with over 100 mistresses and literally tons of cash. Man, I really picked the wrong profession. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I help you guys keep on top of the macro developments coming out of the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. For those of you watching for the first time, a big part of my job is following those macro developments. So if that is something that you might be interested in, and if you want to be just as informed as my clients, maybe consider subscribing. Everyone else, it's good to see you guys. It is a big episode this week. We already had the mid-week episode from a few days ago. Click up there if you haven't seen that one yet, or if you're interested. Otherwise, we're just going to jump into this one. A lot of material, a lot of things to cover. It's been a big week. China is really sprinting into the new year, and of course, with what's happened in the US as well, there has been a state media response, which we're going to cover in this episode. So I think I should just jump into it. But as always, guys, if you enjoy the content, it's a massive help to smash that like button. And I also want to just say from the beginning, thank you so much to the Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. It's fantastic to have your support for such a small channel. It's very humbling, so thank you very much. 2 minor things before we jump into the main stories. One, a lot of you guys have been asking me about Jack Ma. What exactly is going on at the moment? Is he detained? Is he laying low? And these are pretty much the two options at the moment, the 2 likely options. To be frank, at this point, we do not have enough information, and everything we've seen over the last few days is pure speculation. And this is a channel that doesn't really like to jump into speculation or punditry, like to look at the information we have in front of us and then make a judgment and an analysis based on that information, and trying to get as much information as we can to make that analysis. But if you put a gun to my head and ask me, Tony, is he detained or is he just laying low? I would say, on the balance of probabilities, he is probably at this point just laying low. That is what my gamble would be, but I don't know. We will find out hopefully over the next few days or the next week or so what exactly is going on, and when that happens, we'll be discussing it on here. Second thing, my boiler literally just exploded in my bathroom in my Chinese apartment. So there's going to be people coming in and out throughout probably the filming of this, and I'm going to have to stop it to go talk with them and get it fixed. So forgive me if there's some continuity issues throughout the video. I'm just having to deal with that. But that aside, let's just jump into this week's episode, guys. Here we go. Okay, first up, over the last week, there have been several outbreaks of the virus, mostly in the north of China, in Liaoning, which is part of Manchuria or Dongbei, the northeast, and in Hebei, a province that hugs the capital, Beijing. Quote, North China's Hebei province, which is adjacent to Beijing, announced entering wartime mode on Tuesday night after the province released 19 confirmed coronavirus cases and 40 asymptomatic ones since Saturday. And as of the filming of this number has increased to the hundreds. 8 new locally transmitted cases were found in a small village, and I mean small village, which has been put on the highest alert level in the country currently. And according to state media on Tuesday, 5 officials in the Liaoning city of Dalian were punished for providing and organizing private gatherings while in quarantine and disobeying antivirus rules. On Tuesday, too, the city of Beijing increased its mandatory quarantine period to 21 days from 14 for all people arriving from overseas. And on Wednesday, Zhejiang province, the major economic engine that hugs Shanghai in central China, increased its mandatory quarantine period to the longest in the country, 28 days. On the same day, health officials in Shijiazhuang, the provincial capital of Hebei, said that they would test the entire population of 11 million of the people and of residents rather, and that people would be banned from entering residential communities other than their own. Flights and trains have been cancelled, and cars are banned from leaving or entering the city. It's essentially in lockdown. To make matters worse, the city currently does not have a mayor because the last one has had to stand down from last month due to a corruption investigation. Over the last couple of days, several thousand medical personnel have been urgently dispatched to the city. Of course, state-run media in China has continued to assure the public that the situation is very safe and under control, and the government is doing a much better job than all the foreign governments overseas. Quote, compared to some chaotic and disorderly vaccine distribution scenarios in certain cities and states across the US, such as Florida, Chinese cities have been rolling out large-scale vaccinations in an orderly fashion. End quote. Outside of these cities that we've just discussed, the situation in the PRC domestically still seems to be under control, officially at least, and for now. The protests in Washington this week provided PR gold for media officials and propagandists in Beijing. Here is just a taste of some of the state media coverage in the PRC mainland from this week. Quote, political degradation in the US is not necessarily an incurable disease. Perhaps the real problem plaguing the US is that the country's elite are too arrogant. And US political figures are also selfish. They are unwilling to take the lead in pushing for genuine reforms. They only shout empty slogans such as change and we can to fool voters. End quote. And quote, an all-out assault performed by Trump fanatics ripped away the last fig leaf of American democracy about which US politicians have boasted. End quote. And quote, many Chinese netizens confessed in their comments that they saw the chaos in the US as revenge. After inciting so much chaos around the world under the pretext of freedom and democracy, the US has finally tasted the karma of its double standards. End quote. Two strong themes in the state media coverage this week were comparisons to the Hong Kong protests in order to buttress Beijing's policy there to a domestic audience, and also the general idea of American decline, which has been a popular narrative in the PRC in recent years. Quote, what words do they use about Hong Kong? What words are they using now? The spokesperson asked. The mainstream media in the US are condemning the incident, calling it violence, thugs, extremists, and disgrace. What words do they use to describe Hong Kong? Beautiful sight or fighters of democracy? Shan Yi, professor of the School of International Relations and Public Affairs at Fudan University, said what happened in Washington, quote, has pricked the beautiful bubble of the universal values shaped by the US. The beacon of democracy is falling down, or at least becomes gloomy. It might be too early to declare the twilight of the gods in the US, but their day is coming closer and closer. End quote. While the world was watching the scenes in Washington, Beijing, of course, was busy in Hong Kong. On Wednesday morning, Hong Kong police arrested 53 elected pro-democracy officials and activists, the largest mass arrest of persons in the Special Administrative Region since the passing of the so-called National Security Law. Around 1,000 police officers hit targets around the city and seized more than $200,000 worth of Hong Kong currency. With the arrests, Beijing is sending a very strong message. This is the new normal. Get used to it. The following day, on Thursday evening, about a dozen of the 53 arrested were released on bail without charges after spending a night in custody. They are barred from leaving Hong Kong for the next 6 months. In a tweet, Hong Kong-based writer and lawyer Anthony De Perrin observed, quote, this is a win-win for the government. Even if they get a slap in the face, i.e. the cases are acquitted by the courts, that would simply provide more fuel for Beijing's narrative demanding reform of Hong Kong's independent judiciary. Meanwhile, those arrested, essentially the entire opposition camp, may be subject to travel bans and asset freezes. The costs and stress of defending the charges will drain them emotionally and financially, crippling their ability to function effectively. End quote. The mainland coverage of the arrests is no surprise. Quote, the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government said Wednesday that it will not tolerate any offence of subversion and will combat such offence with full efforts in accordance with the law. The Hong Kong police took action specifically targeting active players who organised, planned, committed or participated in acts of subversion and arrested over 50 persons on Wednesday in accordance with the law. End quote. On Wednesday, British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab expressed that the arrests of politicians and activists in Hong Kong were a grievous attack on Hong Kong's rights and freedoms as protected under the Sino-British Joint Declaration. The following day, Foreign Ministry senior spokesperson Hua Chunying called on the UK to, quote, abandon its colonial mentality, end quote, and quote, the Chinese government governs Hong Kong on the basis of the Constitution of the People's Republic of China and the basic law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, not the Joint Declaration, end quote. What is happening in Hong Kong seems to continue creating the political capital in both Taipei as well as Washington for the two to move closer. This sort of statement, for example, would have been unthinkable a few years ago. Quote, the United States supports the Hong Kong people and all who yearn for freedom. In that vein, I am pleased to announce the upcoming visit of US Ambassador to the United Nations, Kelly Craft, to Taiwan, a reliable partner and vibrant democracy that has flourished despite CCP efforts to undermine its great success. Taiwan shows what a free China could achieve, end quote. It is unclear whether the Biden administration will maintain this approach, however, going forward. The CSI 300, or Chinese Securities Index, rose 1.9% at the close of markets on Tuesday, surpassing the highest point the index reached in June of 2015, just before the stock market crash. So the stock market has technically now recovered since that crash 5 years ago. The index has surged more than 50% since a low in March of last year, pushing the total value of China's domestic equities to a record $100 trillion. You guys who have been watching me for some time now will remember that we predicted this about 6 months ago. We discussed a series of state-run financial articles that said the market was about to enter a large bull run period and was pushing or advocating Chinese households to invest and retail investors to invest in the stock market. Around the same time, regulators made it easier for households to buy stocks using credit. Like I said at that time in July, I think it was July 25th, the video if you want to go watch it, the promotion of stock speculation essentially by regulators was probably a strategy and probably continues to be a strategy to get households to pour cheap capital into the corporate sector to promote a supply-side recovery. If this indeed is the strategy, all I would say is 骑虎难下, or once one is riding the tiger, it is very difficult to dismount. After over a year since the COVID outbreak in Wuhan, the WHO is still unable to arrange for visas for all participants in the official WHO investigation. This week, when the investigators were supposed to depart, they were still having issues getting visas. The WHO's Director General expressed his frustrations, calling on China to let the team in. Quote, I'm very disappointed with the news, given the two members have already begun their journeys and others were not able to travel at the last minute, end quote. The following day at a press conference, Foreign Ministry senior spokesperson Lai Xiaomin responded to a question about this issue with the WHO, saying, are you ready? Quote, as you know, on the issue of COVID-19 origin tracing, China has always been open, transparent, and responsible, and taken the lead in carrying out scientific cooperation and tracing the origin with the WHO, with the purpose of promoting international research on origin tracing. The issue of origin tracing is very complicated. In order to ensure the smooth progress of the work of the international expert group in China, necessary procedures need to be fulfilled and relevant specific arrangements need to be made. At present, the two sides are in negotiations on this, end quote. So after 1 year, the WHO is still negotiating with China to get its investigation team in. Chinese media is reporting that debt repayments for Chinese real estate developers will break the 1 trillion RMB or 154.9 billion USD level this year for the first time in history. Into 2021, Beijing officials have continued with the mantra that housing speculation must be curbed. Quote, China will continue to maintain the principle that housing is for living in, not for speculation. It will not use the property market as a form of short-term stimulus to prop up the economy this year, a senior official has said. New city dwellers and young people, especially those working in public service industries, have significant housing problems. Effort to speed up a housing security system with affordable rental housing and joint ownership as a mainstay, End quote. The housing affordability issue in the PRC in the mainland is indeed a very serious problem. Have a look at this chart here. So here is a color-coded chart with a few dozen countries. This is basically showing housing affordability, and the metric that is being used is the ratio between the price of a median home prices and median household income levels. So at the bottom there, like the greenest, the dark green, you can see 2. That means that 2 years of the median household income would cover the cost of a median property or a median housing price. And as it becomes yellow and then orange and red, that rate increases. So you can see there that China is in the 20s or in the 30s, the high 20s, low 30s when it comes to just how many times median household prices are over median disposable income levels for households. And if you go to tier 1 cities like Beijing and Shanghai, that number is about 50 times. So there is a serious housing affordability issue within China. But economists are very quick to point out just how important real estate development is to both growth as well as fiscal revenue, and as such how politically difficult it is to turn the taps off. Quote, 2021 is probably the best year in which to try to restrain real estate development because a rebound in consumption driven by a partial reversal of the 2020 surge in household savings will mean that China can achieve 6 to 7% GDP growth without needing major growth in infrastructure and real estate spending. But this is a one-off opportunity and involves a partial reversal not just of weak consumption in 2020, but also very large increases in infrastructure and real estate spending. By 2022, we will be back to the old ways, and it will be hard for Beijing to continue restraining real estate development without also sharply restraining GDP growth. That is when Beijing will probably start looking the other way as real estate developers return to the banks for credit. End quote. Now, just a few military updates from this week. In his first order this year to the country's military, General Secretary Xi Jinping expressed that the PLA must be ready to, quote, act at any second, end quote, stressed the need for, quote, full-time combat readiness, end quote. According to a government-funded report released last week by the Taipei-based Institute for National Defense and Security Research, the PRC Air Force flew over 180 sorties that entered the island's aerial defense identification zone on a record 91 days from January to November last year. And while we're on this theme and Taiwan, quote, China's major manufacturer of amphibious assault ships, amphibious landing ships, and frigates on Monday started constructing an advanced new shipyard in Shanghai, a move analysts said on Tuesday would boost China's technical level and efficiency in building such vessels. End quote. This week in the US, the White House passed an order banning transactions with the Wechat Pay app, which is owned by Tencent Holding Limited, along with 6 other apps. The order will take effect in 45 days, and it calls on the Commerce Secretary, the Attorney General, and the Director of National Intelligence to issue a report with recommendations to prevent the transfer of data from US users to foreign adversaries. It's unclear whether a Biden White House will maintain the order or not. This week too, the Wall Street Journal writes that in recent weeks, officials of the State Department and the Department of Defense have had conversations on expanding a blacklist of companies that are prohibited to US investments to include Alibaba and Tencent. The two tech giants are China's 2 most valuable publicly listed companies with a combined market capitalization of over $1.3 trillion US. And last up, I want to talk about this guy. This is Lai Xiaomin. Lai is a old school corrupt official. We really do not see players like this anymore. Well, Lai was sentenced to death on Tuesday for accepting 1.79 billion RMB, about 277 million USD, in bribes, corruption, and bigamy. This guy was the chairman of one of China's top 4 asset management companies called 中国华融资产管理. Chinese private media company Taiwan Media reports that when he was arrested, he was found to have over 100 mistresses and 3 metric tons of cash. That's right, this guy was found with over 100 mistresses and literally tons of cash. Man, I really picked the wrong profession. Quote, although Lai had provided information about crimes committed by his subordinates, the court ruled that he did not deserve leniency after taking into account the serious damage his crimes have inflicted on society. Lai is now the second former senior official facing a death penalty for corruption in China. Okay guys, that is our episode for this week. If you enjoyed it, please remember to smash that like button. Leave your comments below. I always love talking to you guys. Wherever you are, stay safe, stay sane. I will see you all next week on China Update.